Hey guys, what's up? Medic Pepper 611 here, back with another video, and it's going to be another video in our first aid series. And I'm sure you guys have noticed I haven't uploaded a first aid video in a while, and I kind of took a step back and wanted to rethink the way I did everything. And what I've decided to do is upload things in a more logical manner and start dealing with the lesser severe injuries first, and then moving on to more severe injuries that are more difficult to manage later on. It just seems more logical that way to me, and it seems like it'll be beneficial to the people that watch the videos, and it'll build a better foundation for them if they're working on their first aid skills. So with that said, today's video is going to deal with bleeding control. And this is a very basic concept that everybody needs to learn if they're learning about first aid, and it can have a great impact on any person you're trying to help's overall outcome of any injury that they possibly they sustain. And I broke the video down into 4 parts, and then at the end of the video I'll give you guys a little brief scenario and demonstrate everything that I've talked about to kind of put everything together. So with that said, let's go ahead and get into it. Alright, the first thing that we really need to go over is the importance of bleeding control. And what I want you guys to realize is this is a very important first aid skill. It is what's called a basic life support skill, and medical professionals everywhere learn how to manage bleeding. EMT basics, paramedics, nurses, doctors, we all have to take classes when we're getting trained about how to quickly and effectively manage bleeding. And that's going to be the goal of this video, is to teach you guys the basics to quickly and effectively manage bleeding if you come across somebody who's injured, or you injure yourself and need to go ahead and do that. A lot of people think of blood as essentially this inert substance that's in the body, and it is way more than that, guys. Blood is the life-sustaining fluid that's in your body. And to give you guys a little bit of anatomy behind it is, I want you guys, there's arteries and veins that run all throughout our body, in your head, in your chest, in your extremities, your arms, your legs. Everything has arteries and veins in it. And I want you guys to think of it as a highway system. And just like on every highway system, there's cars and trucks. And inside the artery and vein highway system, your blood is the cars and trucks. And what it does is it transports things throughout your body. And essentially it transports oxygen and nutrients to and from the heart and to muscles and tissues. And it exchanges things. It drops off the oxygen and nutrients that your body needs to maintain life, keep healthy tissue, muscles, and organs. And then it also removes waste products from those tissues, muscles, and organs, and returns that back to the heart and other parts of the body to be removed from the body to keep your body in that healthy balance. So blood is a very, very important part of the body, and it plays a very crucial role. So any injury or insult that's going to remove blood from the body can potentially be life-threatening. So if you take away anything from this video at all, just remember that your number one goal is to quickly and effectively stop any bleeding. Blood, the most important thing you can do is keep blood inside the body. That's where it belongs. And without it, there is the potential, if the bleeding is severe enough, that injury can result in death. So just keep that in mind, guys. The most important thing you can do, keep it inside the body. Get in there, quickly and effectively manage that bleeding. The second thing I wanted to go over is identifying the types of bleeding that you're going to come across. There are 3 essentially different types of bleeding. There's going to be capillary, venous, and arterial bleeding. And they all have different characteristics that you can look for to help you identify what type of bleeding that you are dealing with. And starting with the least severe and working our way up is capillary bleeding. And an example of a capillary injury would be a paper cut on your finger. It's going to be a very, very minimal injury. It's going to be very superficial, meaning close to the exterior of the body and not deep. And it's going to bleed very little. Capillary bleeding is under no pressure essentially whatsoever, so it's going to be a very, very slow, very easy bleeding that's easy to control. You could essentially just put a band-aid over top of it and effectively control that bleeding. The second type of bleeding that we could work our way up that chain is venous bleeding. And veins are under a little bit of pressure. So when you come across some sort of a venous injury, you may have a slow, steady ooze of blood coming out of the injury. A deeper cut to the arm or to the body may expose a vein that has been lacerated and may result in a venous bleed. it may require a little bit more work to get that bleeding to control. You may have to work on pressure and elevation above the level of the heart to get that bleeding to slow down and stop, so that it can be managed. The third type of bleeding that you may come across is going to be an arterial bleed, and arteries are actually under a great deal of pressure. They're each time your blood is pumped, or each time your heart is pumping inside your body, it's exerting pressure on your arteries, pushing that blood through your body. So the arteries are actually under direct pressure back from the heart. So if you have some sort of an arterial bleed, it can be extremely difficult to manage because it has that pressure behind it trying to push that blood out. So if you come across a very devastating injury, a deep laceration to the body, some sort of a blast injury, or a major trauma to the body, you may very well encounter, some sort of arterial bleeding. And if you see an injury that you have extremely heavy, fast bleeding coming out, or bleeding that you notice it seems like it's coming out with a heartbeat where it'll shoot out, it'll stop, it'll shoot out, it'll stop, it'll shoot out, it'll stop, chances are you're dealing with an arterial bleed, and you really need to think in the back of your head, this could be very, very difficult to manage, and I need to act quickly to help stop that bleeding. Next, we're going to deal with these steps in bleeding control, and it's really actually pretty simple. The most effective thing you can do in 90% of the injuries that you're going to come across, you're going to be able to handle with just a direct pressure and possibly elevation above the level of the heart. And that will take care of 90% of the stuff you come across. The last step, and something I think a lot of people are too quick to jump to, is going to be a tourniquet. And I'm not going to get into a lot of tourniquet issues in this video specifically because I want to make a separate video dealing with tourniquets, because you can potentially do a lot of harm to somebody if you do not use the proper tourniquet and if you do not apply it properly. So, keep in mind that a tourniquet should be your last resort, and don't be too quick to jump to that. Apply that direct pressure, elevate that above the level of the heart, and if you do those things properly, 90% of the injuries, maybe even more than that, you will be able to control just fine using that. There are other things that you can use. There are hemostatic agents such as QuikClot and combat gauze and things along those lines that are impregnated with a hemostatic agent. And for those of you who don't know, those hemostatic agents are things that help the clotting mechanism of the blood, and it helps that blood clot quicker. And when you're applying direct pressure to a wound with a gauze pad or whatever, essentially what you're trying to do is give that injury time and give the blood time for its own clotting mechanism to go ahead and take effect to seal off that wound and prevent the bleeding from continuing. And sometimes with that being difficult to do, you can use QuikClot or you can use a hemostatic gauze to aid in that effect. Now, with that said, QuikClot generally is not something that pre-hospital wise, a paramedic being, they do not like us to use that in chest or abdominal wounds. We do have the ability to use hemostatic gauze agents and put those over a wound, but they generally do not want us to use that in wounds that are central to the body. We don't even actually carry any QuikClot at all on any of the medics that I currently work on, nor do we actually carry any hemostatic gauze. We just carry standard gauze pads, Kerlix gauze, and tourniquets to control bleeding. So I'm not going to tell you guys to use those. If you want to use them, there's plenty of good information out there about them. Seek that information out and do the best you can to learn about those. So with all that said, guys, I'm going to go ahead and break down into the scenario and show you guys how it's all put together. Alright guys, so let's go ahead and break down our scenario here. So we're going to say that either you yourself have sustained an injury, or a person that you have came across has sustained an injury, and you notice that it is actively bleeding, and you need to take steps to quickly and effectively manage that bleeding. So for this scenario, what we're going to say is that somebody has sustained an injury to the middle of the forearm, right in this area right here somewhere. And what you're going to notice with that injury is that it's moderately deep. You notice that it could be possibly a ½ inch or deeper inside the body, and you notice that it has a steady flow of blood coming out of it. So go ahead and take a second to think back to the information I gave you a minute ago, that if you have a moderately deep injury with a slow, steady flow of blood, what type of bleeding are you possibly dealing with? And with the information I gave you, you should have been able to come up with that you could possibly be dealing with a venous type of bleeding here. And knowing that, we may know that it could possibly be difficult to control. So we're going to go ahead and quickly take steps to manage that. So the first thing you should do anytime you have an injury is go ahead and just immediately slap a gauze pad directly on top of it and start applying pressure. And what you should be doing is not just holding it directly around the limb like this. Whatever artery or vein in this scenario that has been lacerated, you want to take and apply pressure directly to it. You don't want to wrap all the way around like this. Go ahead and apply pressure directly over top of that injury, because what you want to do is collapse down that vein, and you want to essentially try to stop blood from coming through that vein. So apply it directly over top of it and hold it and squeeze and elevate it above the level of the heart. This should be one step of the same. Direct pressure, elevated above the level of the heart if possible. Get it up there. You want to use gravity to help you. Veins are under a little bit of pressure, so you're using gravity to fight back against that pressure to help slow down that blood coming out of that vein. So if you hold good moderate pressure directly over top of that injury, elevated above the level of the heart, you should be able to slow down that bleeding. But let's say you didn't. Say you look down at your gauze pad and you've noticed that the blood is completely soaked through it. And you're thinking, this gauze can't be doing any good. It can't possibly soak up any more blood. Well, what should you do? The last thing you want to do is pull this gauze pad off of there, because at this point, hopefully, you have started the clotting process within that wound. So you run the risk, if you remove that gauze pad, of possibly removing any clotting that has already taken effect inside that wound. So what you want to do is just go ahead and grab a second gauze pad and slap it right over top of that first one, and continue to hold that pressure directly over the wound site and elevate it back above the level of the heart. Now, you may have to repeat this process multiple times. You could go 3 or 4 times, 5 or more, to go ahead and control that bleeding. Okay? So we've got it there. Had to put another one on. Elevated above the level of the heart. Continue to hold that pressure directly over that wound. Okay? But say you get there and you notice, man, it looks like the bleeding started to slow down. It looks like it's not bleeding as fast as it was. I think we may go ahead and have it under control. But you really don't want to remove this yet, but you think, well, maybe I should still hold some pressure. So the next step you could do is just apply pressure dressing, all right? And all I've got here is some standard, some Kerlix gauze. So what you would do is just take, and I'll have to do this off camera to get it started, is start wrapping this Kerlix around. And what you're going to want to do is apply pressure to it. Now, do not think of this as a tourniquet. All you're doing is starting to apply some external pressure via this gauze, okay? You are not trying to create a tourniquet. You are not trying to completely cut off the blood flow. You are just trying to continue to hold pressure over it. That is all you are trying to do. We haven't got to the point yet where we've determined that we are going to need to worry about applying a tourniquet. So all I've done is just continue to wrap this around here, applying moderate pressure, stretching it tight, and making sure that I'm keeping pressure over top of that wound site, just keeping pressure directly over top of that injury, okay? That's all we're trying to do. So 90% of injuries that you come across would be able to be managed with the stuff that we've done right here. Simple 4x4 gauze, simple roller gauze. That's all we really need. You may run the risk that at this point you're looking and you say, man, it really hasn't stopped yet. And you're noticing that the person you're trying to help, their mental status is starting to change. They could become confused. They may not know where they are. They may become agitated or combative. You may notice that their skin color is starting to change and get pale. You may notice their skin starts to get wet and moist, like they've been sweating. At that point, you may want to start thinking about applying a tourniquet. When the person has lost enough blood that you are starting to see signs of it yourself externally in their behavior and changes in their body, that's the time that I would suggest you start to apply a tourniquet. A tourniquet should always be your last resort. I'm not going to cover a lot of tourniquet stuff in this video because I am going to make a separate video about it. But in this situation, say you did have to apply a tourniquet. The stuff I will tell you in this video is you want to make sure that you apply it as close to the injury site as possible, okay? You don't want to apply it over a joint. You don't want to be up here by the elbow. You want to try to make sure that you get it as close to the injury site as possible. Why is that? Well, when you're putting on a tourniquet, your one and only goal is to completely, 100% stop blood flow below the level of that tourniquet. So, knowing what I know, or knowing what you know now from what I've told you in the video, think about why it would be bad to completely stop the blood flow below that injury. Okay, it's because that once you completely stop blood flow, that anything below the level of the injury has no way of getting any oxygen or nutrients to it to sustain the rest of that limb. So, if you put the tourniquet way up here around somebody's upper arm, you're completely cutting off circulation to anything below that, all the way down to the elbow joint and anything below that. So your main goal is to keep it as close to the injury site as possible when you apply it, all right? And your goal is to 100% stop blood flow. Anything less is not acceptable. You want to completely cut off blood flow. Alright guys, that's it. To pretty much conclude this video. I hope you guys found it useful. I hope you got some good information out of it. If you did, please don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more videos in the future, guys.